Something happened this morning that most people are going to get completely wrong. And I want to be clear with you before we go any further. This is not complicated. The story is actually very simple. But simple stories are the ones that change everything. Yesterday, Iran announced the Strait of Hormuz was open, fully open. Trump posted "thank you" in capital letters. Market surged, oil dropped. Every major headline said the same thing in slightly different fonts. Deal incoming, war ending, America wins. Then this morning, Iran closed it again. Ships started turning around in the Persian Gulf. Tankers went dark. And the IRGC used a word that matters more than anything else. They said, not military action, not economic pressure, piracy, maritime robbery. Now that word is not random. That word is a signal. Because what happened in the last 24 hours was not confusion, and it was not chaos. It was controlled. And if you understand why it was controlled, you understand everything that comes next. To understand this, you have to start with a very simple framework. Not what countries say they want, what they actually want. Because those two things are almost never the same. America says it wants Hormuz open. It wants stability. It wants a deal. But what America actually wants is something much bigger than a deal. It wants to prove that it still controls the most important energy corridor in the world, that its military and economic pressure can still force outcomes, not just for Iran, but for China, for Russia, for every country watching and quietly asking whether American power still works the way it used to. That is the real objective. The deal is just the surface. Now look at Iran. Iran says it wants sanctions lifted, assets returned, sovereignty respected. But what Iran actually wants is deeper than all of that. Iran wants the Strait of Hormuz to be understood permanently as something it controls in practice, not on paper, not in speeches, in reality. Because if the world starts behaving as if Iran has to be taken into account every time a ship passes through Hormuz, then Iran changes its position completely. It goes from a sanctioned country to an indispensable one. And here's the problem that nobody wants to say out loud. Those two goals cannot exist at the same time. America cannot prove it controls Hormuz if Iran is exercising real influence over it. Iran cannot establish that influence if America is enforcing a blockade. There is no compromise where both sides quietly win. One of them proves their point, or neither does. That's why Iran was never going to give this up on America's terms. Not because it's emotional, not because it wants endless conflict, but because no country willingly gives up the one thing that makes it strategically relevant. And this morning, in less than 24 hours, Iran proved it. But here's the part almost nobody is asking, and it's the most important part of the entire story. How? How does a country under this level of pressure, sanctions, economic strain, military strikes, still make a move like this without hesitation? How does it not fold? The answer is not ideology. It's not stubbornness. It's structure. And that structure has one name: China. Not China as a headline, not China making speeches. China as a system that was built quietly over the last decade. Because what China did was not dramatic. It was not loud. But it was extremely deliberate. It built a parallel framework that allows Iran to survive pressure without collapsing. Start with the financial side. China began buying Iranian oil using its own currency instead of dollars. That sounds technical, but it changes everything, because the entire sanction system depends on controlling dollar transactions. If the transaction never touches that system, the pressure becomes weaker. Not gone, but weaker. Then logistics, a shadow network of oil transport. Ships that disappear from tracking systems, change identities, transfer cargo at sea. Oil doesn't stop moving. It just becomes harder to trace. So on paper, exports drop. In reality, they continue. Then reserves. China spent years building massive stockpiles of oil. So when supply is disrupted and prices spike, it doesn't react the way other countries do. It stays stable. That stability matters more than anything else. because now the shock that is supposed to force Iran into submission doesn't fully transmit through the system. And that creates a gap between pressure and collapse. And that gap is everything. Because pain and collapse are not the same thing. Iran is under pressure, that part is real, but it is not collapsing. It still has enough economic oxygen to make decisions, not just react to them. And that's the key difference. America is trying to force an outcome. Iran still has the ability to choose its response. That is why this morning happened the way it did. Iran didn't just close Hormuz again randomly. It demonstrated something, that it can open it and close it on its own timing, not permanently, not absolutely, but enough to prove that it cannot be ignored. And once that behavior becomes visible, even briefly, it starts to change expectations globally. Because in international systems, perception becomes reality very quickly. So now the real question is not what just happened. The real question is what happens next. And structurally, there are only three paths. The first is a negotiated outcome. Iran accepts a deal, takes economic relief, and both sides present it as a victory. But beneath the surface, something more subtle happens. Iran retains a level of practical influence over Hormuz. Not officially, not declared, but real enough that ships adjust their behavior accordingly. The second path is escalation. Talks fail. Pressure increases, conflict resumes. But the second phase would not look like the first, because now both sides understand more about each other's limits, and Iran, having absorbed the initial pressure, is better prepared for what comes next. The third path, and possibly the most important, is neither of those. No clear deal, no immediate escalation, just a prolonged pause that slowly becomes the new normal. Hormuz stays open, but under an unspoken balance. Iran remains in place. Pressure continues, but without decisive resolution. And over time, that situation hardens into reality. And if that happens, something very important is established, without ever being officially announced. That control of critical global systems is no longer determined by pressure alone. That alternative structures, built quietly over time, can absorb that pressure and prevent collapse. And that is the part most people miss, because this was never just about a straight opening and closing. This is about whether the systems that defined global power for decades still function the same way under stress. And that brings everything back together. This morning was not random. It was a signal. A signal that Iran is not operating from a position of desperation, but from a position where it still has room to act. And that room exists because something was built underneath the surface over the last 10 years. Quietly, gradually, without headlines. So the real takeaway is not about who is stronger militarily. It's about who built the structure that can survive pressure. Because in the end, that's what determines outcomes. Not just force, but resilience. Not just power, but the ability to keep functioning when that power is applied against you. And here's the question that actually matters going forward. If a decade of quiet preparation was enough to shape an outcome like this, what is being built right now, quietly, that will shape the next one?